My daughter-in-law called the police to our home. She's unstable and she's a danger to my children. I looked straight at the officer and said, please, come in. I have something to show you. Her lies disappeared the moment I hit play. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let me tell you how a completely ordinary Tuesday in September became the day. I finally got my revenge on the woman who'd been destroying my family for 3 years. My name is Margaret Maggie Collins. I'm 52 years old, and until this morning, the biggest decision on my mind was whether to make pot roast or chicken for dinner. Officer Daniel Martinez stood in my doorway, trying his best to stay professional while clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Outside, my daughter-in-law Carla paced across my lawn, waving her arms and shouting things like, "She's completely lost it. And my children aren't safe." The thing about Carla Davidson Collins is that she's always been an exceptional actress. When she married my son Kevin 3 years ago, she fooled every one of us with her sweet southern charm and non-stop talk about family values. She baked cookies for fundraisers, volunteered at church, and called me Mama Maggie with so much affection that I actually felt guilty for doubting her in the beginning, but no performance lasts forever. And Carla's had been cracking for months. "Mrs. Collins," Officer Martinez said carefully, "your daughter-in-law called our station this morning claiming you've been behaving erratically and making threats toward her children." I almost laughed, instead. I stepped aside and motioned him in. "Officer Martinez, please come in. Can I offer you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Behind him, Carla shrieked, "Don't go in there alone. She's dangerous." The officer looked back at her, then at me. I stood there in clean jeans, a yellow cardigan my late husband bought me for Christmas, and my grandmother's pearls. I probably looked as dangerous as a golden retriever. "Coffee would be nice, ma'am," he said. I led him into my spotless kitchen, clean counters, fresh garden flowers in a mason jar, and the warm smell of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked for Kevin. "Hardly the home of an unstable woman, Mrs. Collins," he said, taking out a small notebook. "Can you tell me about your interactions with Mrs. Davidson Collins recently?" I poured his coffee into my best china cup and sat across from him. "Well, officer, that's quite a story. But before I tell it, you should know that everything Carla said about me today is a lie, and I can prove it." His eyebrows lifted. "How's that?" I reached into the drawer and placed a small device on the table. "This is a digital recorder. For the past 2 months, I've recorded every conversation I've had with Carla." He blinked. "Why would you do that?" "Because," I said, resting my hand on the recorder, "my daughter-in-law has been trying to turn my son against me, alienate me from my grandchildren, and convince everyone I'm losing my mind. And I finally got tired of being the only one who knew the truth." Outside the window, Carla was pacing faster, her face tight with real panic. She knew exactly what was on that recorder. "That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Collins." "It is," I replied. "And I have very serious evidence." I pressed play. Carla's voice filled the kitchen, sharp, cruel, unmistakable. "Listen, you old bat. I don't care what Kevin thinks he wants. Those children are mine. This family is mine. And if you think I'm going to let some dried-up widow interfere with my plans, you're even more pathetic than I thought." Officer Martinez froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, and that was only the beginning. His hands trembled slightly as he set the cup down. On the recorder, Carla's voice continued, "Kevin's too weak to see what needs to be done. But I'm not. You're going to back off from my family, or I'll make sure everyone thinks you're losing your mind." I watched his face closely as the recording played. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, a witness who couldn't be manipulated by Carla's tears or convinced that I was just a bitter old woman making things up. The recording was from last Thursday. Carla had come over while Kevin was at work, supposedly to pick up some toys the kids had left behind. But by then, I'd learned exactly what her visits really were: hunting expeditions. "You see, officer," I said quietly as I paused the recording, "this conversation happened right in my living room. Carla thought she was safe because Kevin wasn't here. She assumed I'd never tell him what she really said to me." "Jesus," he muttered, then quickly corrected himself. "Excuse me, ma'am," I smiled. "I've heard worse. There's more, if you're interested." Through the window, Carla had stopped pacing. Now she stood perfectly still, staring at my house like she'd just realized the ground beneath her was shifting. I forwarded to another conversation, this one from 2 weeks ago. Carla's voice filled the kitchen again, but this time, she wasn't angry. She was calculating. "I've been talking to some people at the country club, Maggie. They're all saying the same thing about you. How you've been forgetting conversations, repeating yourself, getting confused about dates. It's such a shame when someone your age starts declining." On the recording, you could hear my voice responding calmly. "What people at the country club, Carla? Oh, you know. Jennifer Morrison, Beth Caldwell. They're all concerned about you. What Carla didn't know was that I'd had lunch with both Jennifer and Beth the day before that conversation. Neither of them had said a single thing about my mental state, because neither of them had noticed any decline. They had, however, mentioned that Carla was asking a lot of questions about early onset dementia and how families handle difficult situations with aging relatives. Officer Martinez shook his head slowly. Mrs. Collins, how long has this been going on? The recordings? 2 months. But her campaign against me started about 6 months after she married Kevin. It was subtle at first, little comments about how tired I seemed, suggestions that maybe I shouldn't drive at night, conversations about how lonely it must be living in a big house by myself. I let out a breath. I was stupid enough to think she was being caring. She's been building a case, I continued, planting seeds with Kevin, with neighbors, with anyone who would listen. Maggie's getting older. Maggie seems confused lately. Maybe Maggie shouldn't be around the children so much. The officer looked genuinely disturbed. That's psychological abuse. It's also brilliant, I admitted. Carla's a pediatric nurse. She knows exactly how to sound concerned and professional. And she picked the perfect target, a widow with no close family nearby. Someone whose word might seem less reliable than that of a young mother. I pressed play again. This recording was from 3 weeks ago, after Kevin had gently suggested that maybe I should simplify my living situation. Carla's voice was pure honey. Kevin, your mother's been calling me at work, asking the same questions over and over. Yesterday she called 3 times about what time we were coming over for dinner, even though we already told her we couldn't. That was a complete lie. I had called once to confirm they weren't coming so I could invite my neighbor Grace instead. She's also been telling the children strange stories. Yesterday Emma came home asking why Grandma Maggie said their daddy was going to take them away. Another lie. I had never said any such thing. Officer Martinez looked at me with something close to admiration. How did you know to start recording? I didn't know. I suspected. But my granddaughter gave me the confirmation. I could still picture that morning. Emma, 8 years old, eating cereal at my kitchen table. She'd asked me why I told her daddy I didn't want to see them anymore. When I told her I'd never said that, she frowned. But Mommy said you called and said you were too tired for visitors, and that we shouldn't bother you so much. That was the moment everything clicked. Carla wasn't twisting the truth, she was inventing it. I started recording the very next day. Mrs. Collins, Officer Martinez said carefully. Do you have any idea why your daughter-in-law would want to isolate you from your family? I smiled, but there wasn't a trace of humor in it. Oh, officer, I said softly. That's where the story gets really interesting. Money, I said simply, letting the word linger between us. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? Officer Martinez leaned forward, fully invested now in the web he'd stepped into. You see, when my husband died 5 years ago, he left me very well provided for. The house is paid off. I have a substantial savings account. And there's a life insurance policy that Kevin will inherit when I die, about $300,000 in total. The officer let out a low whistle. Carla knows all of this because Kevin told her when they were planning their wedding and talking about their future financial security. At the time, I thought it was sweet how interested she seemed in family history and traditions. I reached for another cookie from the plate between us, mostly to keep my hands busy. What Kevin doesn't know, I continued, is that his wife has been visiting estate attorneys. Officer Martinez blinked. How do you know that? Because my friend Dorothy works at Harrington, Wells and Associates downtown. She told me she's seen Carla there several times over the past few months. When Dorothy asked if everything was okay with the family, Carla said she was helping me with some paperwork, because I'd been having trouble managing my affairs. His expression darkened. More lies, exactly. So I did some investigating of my own. Turns out Carla has been researching guardianship laws, specifically how to have someone declared mentally incompetent. I let that sink in through the window. I could see Carla with her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling Kevin, spinning some story about how the police were at his mother's house. And she was so worried about my mental state. The plan was elegant, really, I said. Isolate me from my support system, document my supposed decline, and eventually petition the court to have Kevin appointed as my guardian. Once that happened, she would have control over my finances, my medical decisions, my living situation, everything. That's. Officer Martinez struggled for the word. Evil, I offered. Yes, he said quietly. Evil. I forwarded the recorder to a conversation from just last week. Carla's voice came through, soft and syrupy, the tone she used whenever she was plotting. Kevin, I think we need to seriously consider what's best for your mother. She called me yesterday asking if I knew where she put her grocery list. And when I said I didn't know, she got angry and accused me of moving her things around. I had never made such a call, and yesterday when I picked up the kids, she seemed confused about what day it was. She kept saying it was Thursday when it was clearly Wednesday. It had been Thursday. I'm starting to think she might need more supervision than we realized. Maybe we should look into assisted living or at least someone checking on her more regularly. On the recording, Kevin's voice sounded distant but worried. I know you're right, but it's hard to think about mom not being independent anymore. I understand. Honey, Carla said sweetly, but we have to think about her safety. And the children's safety, too. What if she forgets to turn off the stove while they're visiting? What if she gets confused and takes them somewhere, then can't remember how to get home? Officer Martinez looked physically sick. She was manipulating your son masterfully. I agreed. Kevin loves me, but he trusts his wife. When someone you love repeats the same concerns over and over presented with compassion and backed by fabricated examples, you start to believe it. I paused the recording and looked him in the eye. The brilliant part was that Carla never directly said I was mentally incompetent. She just planted dozens of tiny seeds. Maybe Maggie's getting forgetful. Maybe someone should keep an eye on her. Maybe she's not as sharp as she used to be. How long would it have taken for her plan to work? He asked. Not long, I said. Another month or two, maybe. She'd just need a carefully staged incident where I looked confused or disoriented. And Kevin would have started seriously considering guardianship proceedings. Just then, my phone rang. Kevin's number flashed on the screen. That'll be my son, I said. Carla's probably told him some dramatic story about how there was an incident, and he needs to rush over to handle the situation. I answered. Hi, sweetheart, Mom, are you okay? Carla called and said the police are at your house. What happened? Everything's fine, Kevin. Officer Martinez is here because Carla called the police station this morning, claiming I was dangerous and unstable. Silence. She said, what? Why don't you come over? I said gently. I think there are some things we need to discuss as a family. I'm leaving work now. Mom, are you sure you're all right? I'm better than I've been in months, honey. I'll see you soon. After I hung up, Officer Martinez asked, are you going to tell your son about the recordings? I looked out the window at Carla, who was now pacing frantically and talking rapidly into her phone. Oh, yes, I said. I'm going to tell him everything, but first, I had one more recording to play. This last recording, I told Officer Martinez, is from 3 days ago. It's the one that made me realize Carla wasn't just planning to have me declared incompetent. She was planning to have me committed. I fast-forwarded to the right section. Carla's voice came through. Crisp and professional. Dr. Henderson, this is Carla Collins. I'm calling about my mother-in-law, Margaret Collins. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, and I'm very concerned about some behaviors I've been observing. My blood still ran cold hearing it, knowing she'd made this call from my own kitchen while I was supposedly napping upstairs. She's been exhibiting signs of paranoid delusions lately. Yesterday, she accused me of moving her things around and claimed I was trying to make her look confused. She's also been hoarding medications and seems convinced that someone is trying to hurt her. Officer Martinez's face had gone completely pale. I know you can't diagnose over the phone, Dr. Henderson, but as a healthcare professional, I'm concerned she might be experiencing early-stage dementia with paranoid features. Her son is my husband, and we're very worried about her safety and the safety of our children when they visit. I paused the recording. Double quotes. Dr. Henderson is a psychiatrist who specializes in geriatric mental health. I explained. He's also someone Carla knew through work. She was setting up a professional consultation. Worse, she was creating medical documentation of my supposed mental decline, using her credentials as a nurse to make it believable. The sickest part was how well Carla understood the system. As a pediatric nurse, she knew exactly which symptoms to mention, which terminology to use, and how to present herself as a caring family member instead of someone with a hidden agenda. I played the rest of the call. We'd like to schedule an evaluation, Dr. Henderson, preferably something we could arrange without her knowledge at first, since she's very resistant to the idea that anything is wrong. How soon could we set something up? I'm concerned waiting might put everyone at risk. Officer Martinez set down his coffee cup. Mrs. Collins, this is criminal. She was building a false medical case against you. And if Dr. Henderson had agreed to see me based on her report and found even normal age-related forgetfulness, it would have been documented as supporting evidence. I saw the officer working through the implications. A psychiatric evaluation suggesting cognitive decline, combined with months of incidents and Carla's carefully constructed concerns, would have been more than enough to justify a guardianship petition. The truly beautiful part of Carla's plan, I continued, was that it would have looked completely legitimate. A loving daughter-in-law worried about an aging woman. A devoted son reluctantly facing hard truths. Medical professionals confirming it all. My front door chimed. Through the window, Kevin's truck pulled into the driveway. He was walking toward the house quickly, his face tight with worry. Mrs. Collins. Officer Martinez said quietly, I need to ask something directly. Are you experiencing any memory issues, confusion, or other symptoms that might explain your daughter-in-law's concerns? I smiled, officer. 2 months ago I might have wondered that myself. Carla was very good at making me question my own mind. But no, I'm not experiencing any cognitive decline. How can you be certain? Because after I started recording our conversations, I also started documenting everything else. I keep detailed notes about my daily activities, conversations, appointments. I had my doctor run a complete physical and cognitive assessment. I even took one of those online memory tests. I pulled a folder from the kitchen drawer. Dr. Williams confirmed I'm in excellent physical and mental health for a woman my age. My memory, reasoning ability, and judgment are all well within normal ranges. Kevin's footsteps were on the porch now. More importantly, I continued. I've been keeping careful track of every incident Carla claimed happened, the confused phone calls, the forgotten conversations, the strange behavior around the children. Officer Martinez. I have documentation proving that every single incident she reported was either completely fabricated or a deliberate misrepresentation of normal events. Kevin knocked on the door. Come in. Sweetheart, I called out. We're in the kitchen. My son appeared in the doorway. His dark hair disheveled and his face creased with worry. At 32, Kevin looked remarkably like his father had at that age, with the same kind eyes and the same gentle demeanor that had made him such an easy target. For someone like Carla, Mom, what's going on? He asked. Kevin, I interrupted gently, I'd like you to sit down. There are some things about your wife that you need to know. He looked between Officer Martinez and me, clearly trying to understand what kind of situation he had walked into. Is someone going to tell me why there's a police officer in my mother's kitchen? Your wife called the police this morning, Officer Martinez said carefully, claiming that your mother was exhibiting dangerous and unstable behavior. Kevin's face went completely white. She said, what? I reached across the table and took my son's hand. Honey, for the past several months, Carla has been lying to you about me. She's been lying to everyone about me, and I can prove it. I placed the recorder on the table in front of him. Before you listen to this, I want you to know that I love you, and nothing that's about to happen changes that. Then, I pressed play. Kevin's face shifted through a series of expressions as he listened to his wife's voice, detailing her real feelings about me and her plans for our family. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to anger, and finally to something that looked like grief. Turn it off, he said quietly after the third recorded conversation. I stopped the recording and waited. Officer Martinez discreetly checked his phone, giving us a moment of family privacy. How long? Kevin asked, voice barely above a whisper. How long have I been recording? 2 months, no. How long has this been going on? Since about 6 months after your wedding. He put his head in his hands. Jesus, Mom, why didn't you tell me? It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer revealed how thoroughly Carla had succeeded in undermining our relationship. Because she made me doubt myself first, I said softly. And then she made me doubt whether you'd believe me. Kevin looked up sharply. I would have believed you, would you? Honey, 3 weeks ago, you suggested I might want to consider simplifying my living situation. 2 weeks ago, you asked if I was taking my medications regularly. Last week, you wanted to know if I'd thought about having someone check on me during the day. Recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. She told me you were showing signs of confusion. She told you a lot of things. I said gently, and because you love us both, you tried to find a middle ground. You started watching me for signs of decline, and she made sure you found them. Officer Martinez cleared his throat lightly. Mr. Collins, I hate to interrupt, but there's something else you should know. Your wife wasn't just trying to make your mother appear confused. She was actively working to have her declared mentally incompetent. I showed Kevin the folder with my medical records and documentation I started keeping. Detailed notes about everything once I realized what was happening. Every conversation, every activity, every interaction with your wife. I also had Dr. Williams run a complete evaluation. Kevin flipped through the pages, his expression growing more troubled with each document. Dr. Williams found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever. I continued. In fact, he was impressed with my mental acuity and organizational skills. The recording where she calls Dr. Henderson, Officer Martinez added, that's attempted fraud. She was using her professional credentials to create false medical documentation. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Outside, I could see Carla had moved closer to the house and appeared to be trying to listen at the window. Finally, he spoke. What was her endgame, Mom? What did she want? Financial control, I said simply. Once I was declared incompetent and you were appointed as my guardian, she'd have access to my accounts, my property. My insurance policies everything, but I would never, Kevin, I said gently. You're a good man with a generous heart. If your wife convinced you that I needed expensive care, or that the children needed college funds, or that the family needed a bigger house, would you have said no? His silence was answer enough. She was patient, I said quietly. I admitted this wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This was a long-term plan to gradually gain control over our families' financial resources while positioning herself as the devoted daughter-in-law who was just looking out for everyone's best interests. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. You're going to regret this. I showed it to Officer Martinez, who immediately looked toward the window where Carla was standing. Mr. Collins, the officer said, I think we need to have a conversation with your wife. Kevin stood up slowly, like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Officer Martinez, what are my mother's options here? Well, the officer said, based on what I've heard today, there are several potential charges we could pursue. Harassment, fraud, filing false police reports, possibly even elder abuse. I held up my hand. Before we go down that road, I'd like to try something else first. Both men looked at me curiously. Kevin, I want you to call your wife and ask her to come inside. Tell her the officer needs to speak with both of you about the situation. Mom, what are you planning? I smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. I'm going to give Carla a chance to tell the truth. One last opportunity to be honest with you about what she's been doing. Officer Martinez looked skeptical. Mrs. Collins, I don't think she's going to confess. She will if she thinks confessing is her best option for damage control. I had been studying Carla for 3 years. I knew exactly how her mind worked when she felt cornered. She'd calculate the odds, determine the most advantageous position, and then present whatever version of events served her interests best. But this time, I was going to control the narrative. Kevin pulled out his phone reluctantly. Carla, can you come inside? Officer Martinez needs to speak with both of us. Through the window, I watched her face as she listened to Kevin's request. Even from a distance, I could see her mind working, trying to determine what story would serve her best. She was about to find out that I'd finally learned to play her game, and I was better at it than she was. Carla entered my kitchen like a woman walking into battle. She had composed herself during the walk from the yard to the house, arranging her features into an expression of concerned worry. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless despite the morning's drama, and she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who believed she still controlled the situation. Kevin, thank goodness you're here, she said, rushing to him and placing a protective hand on his arm. I've been so worried about your mother's behavior lately. She glanced at Officer Martinez and me with what appeared to be nervous concern. Officer, I hope you understand that calling the police wasn't something I did lightly. But when someone you care about starts exhibiting dangerous signs, you have to put safety first. I had to admire her performance. If I didn't know better, I'd believe she was genuinely concerned about my welfare. Mrs. Davidson Collins, Officer Martinez said formally, your mother-in-law has made some serious allegations about your behavior toward her. Carla's eyes widened with apparent shock. Allegations? What kind of allegations? She claims you've been systematically lying about her mental state to family members and medical professionals. For just a moment, something flickered across Carla's face, not surprise, but calculation. She was rapidly assessing this new information and determining her best response strategy. Officer, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, she said, her voice shifting into the professional tone she used at the hospital. As a healthcare worker, I've been genuinely concerned about some changes I've observed in Margaret's behavior. If she's interpreting my concern as something malicious, that might actually be indicative of the paranoid thinking patterns we sometimes see in early cognitive decline. Brilliant. She was using my accusation as evidence of my supposed mental illness. Kevin looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile the wife he loved with the evidence he'd just heard. Carla, he said carefully, Mom played me some recordings. Recordings? Carla's voice rose with what sounded like genuine alarm. Kevin, if your mother has been secretly recording private family conversations, that's extremely concerning behavior. That's exactly the kind of paranoid activity I've been worried about. She turned to Officer Martinez. This is what I mean about the changes I've been observing, the suspicion, the secretive behavior, the accusations against family members who are trying to help. I almost applauded. Carla was turning my evidence into proof of her claims. It was a masterful deflection. But I hadn't survived 52 years on this earth without learning a thing or two. About fighting dirty when necessary, Carla, I said pleasantly, that's fascinating. So you're saying that recording family conversations is paranoid behavior? Of course it is. Normal people don't secretly record their loved ones. I reached into my kitchen drawer and pulled out a second device. Then, I'm curious how you'd characterize this. Carla's face went dead white. This, I continued, is a voice recorder I found hidden behind the coffee maker last month. Strange place for it to end up, don't you think? The silence in the room was deafening. You see, Officer Martinez, Carla's been recording our conversations too. The difference is that she's been doing it without my knowledge or consent. I had found the recorder 3 weeks ago while cleaning. At first, I'd assumed Kevin had dropped it and forgotten about it. But when I examined it more closely, I found hours of recorded conversations between Carla and me. Conversations that had been carefully edited to remove context and make my responses seem confused or inappropriate, but unlike my recordings, which capture complete, unedited conversations, I said. Carla's recordings appear to have been manipulated. I pressed play on her device. My own voice filled the kitchen mid-sentence. Don't remember saying that. Confused about what day? Can't find my keys anywhere. Out of context, I sounded exactly like someone experiencing memory problems. Officer Martinez looked at Carla with undisguised disgust. You've been secretly recording and editing conversations to make your mother-in-law appear incompetent. Carla opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Kevin stared at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. Carla, what the hell is this? Finally, she found her voice. I was documenting concerning behaviors for her own protection. Medical professionals need specific examples when evaluating cognitive decline. No, I said firmly. You were manufacturing evidence. And when that wasn't enough, you started escalating to more dramatic measures. I turned to Officer Martinez. The phone call to Dr. Henderson wasn't Carla's first attempt to create professional documentation of my supposed mental illness. She's also contacted my insurance company asking about coverage for in-home psychiatric care. And she's been in touch with 3 different assisted living facilities, asking about their memory care programs. Carla's professional composure was finally cracking. Margaret is twisting everything. Yes, I've been exploring options for her care because I'm concerned about her safety. That's what responsible family members do. Responsible family members, I said, don't lie to police officers. They don't forge medical documentation. And they certainly don't threaten elderly relatives. I played the recording of Carla's threat, her promise to make everyone believe I was losing my mind. Kevin listened to his wife's voice with growing horror. When the recording ended, he looked at Carla with a mixture of disgust and grief that broke my heart. How long? He asked quietly. Kevin, you have to understand, how long have you been planning this? Carla looked around the room desperately, searching for some way to salvage the situation. But when she realized there wasn't one, something fundamental shifted in her expression. The mask finally fell away completely. Since before we got married, she said flatly. Did you really think I was interested in a middle school math teacher for his sparkling personality? The words hit Kevin like a physical blow, and that's when I realized Carla had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Kevin's face went completely blank the way it used to when he was a child, and someone hurt him so deeply that his mind simply couldn't process it. I watched my son's heart break in real time, and for a moment, I wanted to take everything back, to pretend none of this had ever happened, just to spare him this pain. But it was too late for that now. Before we got married, Kevin repeated slowly. You planned this before we got married? Carla seemed to realize she'd revealed too much because she immediately tried to backtrack. Kevin, that's not what I meant. I was upset. I misspoke. No, his voice was quiet but firm. You didn't misspeak. You told the truth for the first time since I've known you. Officer Martinez was taking notes now, his expression professional but his eyes reflecting the same disgust I felt. Mrs. Davidson Collins, he said, I need to ask you directly, did you marry Mr. Collins with the intention of gaining access to his family's financial resources through fraudulent means? For a moment, I honestly thought Carla might try to lie again. But then she really looked at Kevin, saw the heartbreak on his face, and something in her finally gave way. She knew the game was over. You want the truth? She said, her voice sharp and bitter. Fine, here's the truth. She turned to Kevin with a look that was almost pity. I met you at that hospital charity event. Remember, you were so sweet talking about your students, your mother, and how close your family was. And when you mentioned that your mom was well off and that you were her only heir, I thought, here's a nice man who can give me the stability I deserve. Kevin recoiled as if she'd slapped him. The original plan was simple, Carla continued, almost casually. Marry you, be the perfect daughter-in-law for a few years, and eventually inherit everything when Margaret died naturally. I was patient. I could wait, but what changed? Officer Martinez asked. Carla gave a humorless laugh. Margaret changed. She didn't decline the way older people usually do. She stayed sharp, stayed active, stayed healthy. And I realized she could live another 20 or 30 years. She glanced at me with a hint of reluctant respect. You're tougher than I expected, Margaret. I'll give you that. So you decided to speed up the timeline, I said. I decided to take control of the situation, she corrected. The incompetency angle would have worked perfectly. Kevin would have become your guardian. I would have convinced him that expensive care was necessary, and slowly, we would have gained access to your resources for your own good. Kevin pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. You manipulated me. You made me doubt my own mother. I gave you a chance at financial security you'd never get on a teacher's salary, Carla snapped. You should be thanking me. The boldness of that statement stunned the room into silence. Mrs. Davidson Collins, Officer Martinez said at last. You've just confessed to multiple felonies: fraud, elder abuse, filing false police reports. Conspiracy, prove it. Carla shot back instantly. Yes, I recorded some conversations. Yes, I worried about Margaret's mental state. Yes, I called medical professionals. But nothing I did was illegal, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The recordings were damaging but not explicitly criminal. The doctor calls could be framed as concern. Even the false police report would be difficult to prosecute if she claimed she genuinely believed I was dangerous. Carla had lived in the legal gray areas, deliberate, calculated, but I had spent 2 months preparing for this moment, actually. Carla, I said calmly, you did do something illegal. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. These are copies of medical records you accessed using your hospital login to dig through my health history. Dr. Williams gave them to me after I explained someone was accessing my files without permission. Carla went pale. Computer fraud is a felony in this state, Officer Martinez said, scanning the documents. Unauthorized access to medical records carries serious penalties, and that's not all. I continued, placing another sheet on the table. This is the application you submitted to Riverside Memorial, requesting a psychiatric evaluation for a supposedly delusional elderly family member. You listed yourself as the referring medical professional and provided false information about my symptoms and history. Then I placed the last document in front of her. And this shows that you used your hospital's computer system to research guardianship procedures, legal precedents for cognitive decline, and estate planning strategies, all during work hours, all using credentials that do not authorize that type of access. Carla stared at the papers as if watching her life fall apart piece by piece. Kevin looked at me in disbelief. Mommy, how did you? Your wife isn't the only one who knows how to build a case, sweetheart, I said softly. The difference is that my evidence is legitimate. Officer Martinez reached for his handcuffs. Mrs. Davidson Collins, you're under arrest for computer fraud, filing false medical reports, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As he read her rights, Carla looked at Kevin one last time. You'll never find anyone else who will put up with your boring life and your clingy mother. Kevin met her gaze without flinching. Good, but I knew this wasn't the end. Carla was resourceful, intelligent, and completely without a conscience. Even in the face of criminal charges, she'd already be thinking about how to minimize the fallout and twist things to her advantage. I just hadn't expected her final move to be this vicious. 20 minutes after Officer Martinez led Carla away in handcuffs, my kitchen felt unnervingly quiet. Kevin sat at the table, staring into his coffee cup like it might explain everything he didn't yet know how to process. Mom, he said finally, his voice small, I'm so sorry, you have nothing to apologize for. Sweetheart, I do. He shook his head. I believed her. I actually started to think you might be losing your memory. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. She's very good at what she does. She fooled me for months, too. But you figured it out eventually. Yeah, he said quietly. But not before she did some real damage. We sat in a heavy but comfortable silence for a while, both trying to absorb everything that had happened. I was just starting to think the worst was behind us when my phone rang. Kevin's name lit up the screen even though he was sitting right across from me. That's my phone, Kevin said, checking his pockets. Confused. I answered carefully. Hello, Margaret. This is Dr. Patricia Williams from Child Protective Services. Her voice was professional, but there was a clear note of concern. I'm calling about a report we received this morning regarding the children in your son's care. My stomach dropped. What kind of report? We received information suggesting the children may be in an unsafe environment due to domestic violence in the home and concerns about their father's mental stability. Following a family crisis, I looked at Kevin. His face had gone completely white as he realized exactly what had happened. Dr. Williams, I asked, can you tell me who filed this report? I'm not able to share that information, she said. But I can tell you it came from someone identifying themselves as a mandated reporter with medical credentials, Carla, even from jail. She was still playing games, Dr. Williams, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. There's been a serious misunderstanding. The person who filed that report was arrested this morning for elder abuse and filing false reports. Mom, regardless of the source, we are legally required to investigate any report involving potential harm to children. I'll need to speak with your son and assess the children's living situation. Kevin grabbed the phone from me. This is Kevin Collins. Those are my children you're talking about. Mr. Collins, I understand this is stressful, but I need you to bring Emma and Tyler to our office for interviews this afternoon. We also need to conduct a home visit to ensure their environment is safe. When Kevin hung up, he looked at me with pure panic in his eyes. Mom, what if they take the kids? They won't, I said firmly, though inside, I was terrified. Carla had timed this perfectly. CPS investigations could drag on for weeks or months, and even baseless reports could turn a family upside down. We need to call a lawyer, Kevin said immediately. Reaching for his phone, we need to do better than that, I told him. We need to go on the offensive. Over the past few months, I'd learned something important. When someone is trying to destroy your life piece by piece, simply defending yourself isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back with everything you've got, Kevin. Call your principal and explain you need the rest of the week off for a family emergency. Then call Emma and Tyler's school and let them know what's happening so they're prepared. If CPS reaches out, he nodded. What are you going to do? I'm going to make some phone calls of my own. The first call was to my lawyer, James Morrison, who'd handled my affairs since Harold died. I explained everything and asked him to represent Kevin during the CPS investigation. The second call was to my physician, Dr. Williams, to request copies of my complete medical records and a written statement confirming my mental competency. The third call was to Detective Sarah Chen, who had taken over the case from Officer Martinez. Detective Chen, this is Margaret Collins. I wanted to give you a heads up that Carla Davidson Collins has filed a false report with Child Protective Services as retaliation for her arrest. What kind of report? She asked. She's claiming there's domestic violence in my son's home and that he's mentally unstable. It's clearly an attempt to maintain control even from jail, Detective Chen sighed. Mrs. Collins, I wish I could say this was unusual, but manipulative people often escalate when they're caught. Do you have evidence that the CPS report is false? I have extensive documentation of her pattern of filing false reports. I also have character references for my son from his employer, his children's teachers, and other community members. I'll contact CPS directly and make sure they're aware that the person who filed this report is facing criminal charges for similar behavior. The fourth call was the most important one. Channel 7 News. This is Amanda Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Margaret Collins. I believe you'd be interested in a story about elder abuse, family fraud, and false police reports. I'm listening, she replied. This morning, my daughter-in-law was arrested for attempting to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain control of my finances. As retaliation, she's now filed false reports with Child Protective Services targeting my son and grandchildren. That's definitely newsworthy. Can you provide documentation? I have recordings, medical records, police reports, and a very clear timeline of fraudulent behavior. When can we meet? I glanced at Kevin, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing amazement. How about this afternoon? I think it's time this story got the attention it deserves. After I hung up, Kevin stared at me. Mom, you're going public with this? Honey, I said, standing and straightening my shoulders. Your wife spent months building a case against me using lies and manipulation. Now she's trying to use the same tactics against you and the children. It's time someone showed her what a real campaign looks like. For 3 years, I had been playing defense, letting Carla control the narrative and set the terms of engagement. I was done being the victim. It was time to show everyone who the real Margaret Collins was. The Channel 7 News interview was scheduled for 4 p.m., giving us time to prepare our strategy. Kevin picked up Emma and Tyler from school early, explaining that they'd be staying with our neighbor, Grace, for a few days while we sorted out family matters. Are we in trouble, Daddy? Emma asked, her 8-year-old face creased with worry. No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and other grown-ups have to help fix them. But you and Tyler are perfectly safe. Tyler, only 5, seemed less concerned about abstract trouble and more interested in the fact that Grace had promised chocolate chip cookies. As the children played in Grace's backyard, Kevin and I sat in my living room organizing our documentation. I had spent the morning creating a comprehensive timeline of Carla's behavior, complete with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. Mom, Kevin said, reviewing the paperwork, this is incredibly thorough. When did you have time to put all this together? I've been working on it for weeks. I knew this day would come eventually. The truth was, I had been preparing for war long before I started recording Carla's conversations. Once I recognized her pattern of behavior, I began documenting everything with the same systematic attention to detail that had served me so well during my 30-year career as a school administrator. Amanda Rodriguez arrived at 3:30, accompanied by a cameraman and a producer. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a confident demeanor suggesting she had handled her share of difficult stories. Mrs. Collins, thank you for reaching out to us. Stories like this are important, but they're also sensitive. I want to make sure we handle everything appropriately. I appreciate that, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm not looking to create a media circus. I just want people to understand what elder abuse actually looks like and how sophisticated these schemes can be. We spent an hour going through the timeline, the recordings, and the documentation. Amanda's expression grew serious as she grasped the scope of Carla's manipulation. This is remarkable, she said finally. The level of planning and manipulation involved is extraordinary. How do you feel about going public with such personal family details? I thought carefully. A week ago, the idea of discussing my private life on television would have horrified me. But Carla had already made our family business public by involving the police, medical professionals, and now Child Protective Services. Ms. Rodriguez, if my story prevents even one other family from going through this, it's worth whatever embarrassment I might experience. The interview itself was easier than I'd expected. Amanda asked thoughtful questions and let me tell the story in my own words. I played selected portions of the recordings, explained Carla's methodology, and described the impact her campaign had on our family. What surprised you most about your daughter-in-law's behavior? Amanda asked how patient she was. I replied, this wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was a carefully planned, long-term strategy. She was willing to invest years of her life in this deception. What would you say to other families who might be experiencing something similar? Trust your instincts. If someone in your family is consistently trying to make you doubt your own perceptions, if they're isolating you from your support systems, if they suddenly become very interested in your finances or medical decisions, pay attention to those red flags. The interview aired on the 6 o'clock news that evening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang non-stop for the next 2 hours. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, and even complete strangers called to offer support, share similar experiences, or ask for advice. Several people mentioned they had concerns about Carla, but didn't know how to express them. Mrs. Thompson from down the street called to say that Carla had approached her months ago, asking questions about my daily routine and whether I seemed confused or forgetful. Mr. Davis from the hardware store mentioned that Carla had been asking about home security systems, specifically ones that could monitor elderly residents. Even more disturbing were the calls from other potential victims. 3 different women contacted me to describe similar situations with family members systematically undermining their independence and credibility. But the most important call came at 8:47 p.m. Mrs. Collins, this is Dr. Patricia Williams from Child Protective Services. I've just seen your news interview, and I wanted to personally apologize for the stress our investigation has caused your family. Dr. Williams, you were just doing your job, I said. Perhaps, she replied, but we should have been more thorough in vetting the source of the report. Detective Chen contacted us this afternoon with additional information about Mrs. Davidson Collins. And in light of everything we've learned, we're closing our investigation immediately. What does that mean for my son and grandchildren? I asked. It means they can go home tonight and resume their normal lives. We'll be flagging Mrs. Davidson Collins in our system to prevent any future false reports from being taken at face value. After I hung up, Kevin looked at me in amazement. Mom, how did you know the news interview would work? Because bullies count on their victims staying silent. They count on shame, embarrassment, and the desire to keep family problems private. Once you shine a light on their behavior, once you refuse to be ashamed of being targeted, their power disappears. It was nearly 10 p.m. when Detective Chen called with an update on Carla's situation. Mrs. Collins, I wanted you to know that Mrs. Davidson Collins has been denied bail pending trial. The judge considered her recent attempt to manipulate Child Protective Services as evidence that she poses a continued threat to your family. How long will she be in jail? I asked, with the charges we're filing and her confession on record. She's looking at significant prison time. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal. I hung up and looked at Kevin, who was sitting on the couch watching the 10 o'clock news replay of our family's ordeal. It's over. I said, is it really? He asked. I thought about that. Carla was in jail. The CPS investigation was closed. Our story was public. But I knew the real work of healing our family was just beginning. The legal part is over, I said. The rest is up to us. But first, there was one more thing I needed to do. 3 weeks later, I stood in courtroom 3B, watching Carla Davidson Collins accept a plea deal that would send her to prison for 7 years. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her makeup and professional attire. The orange jumpsuit was definitely not her color. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Carla stood and faced our side of the courtroom. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and steady. I maintained that my actions were motivated by genuine concern for family welfare. I believe that with more time and better communication, this entire situation could have been resolved without legal intervention. Even now, facing 7 years in prison, she couldn't admit she'd done anything wrong. The judge was unimpressed. Mrs. Davidson Collins, you have manipulated medical professionals, law enforcement, and social services in a systematic campaign of fraud and abuse. Your lack of remorse is as troubling as your original crimes. After the sentencing, Kevin and I walked out of the courthouse together. The children were at school, blissfully unaware that this particular chapter of their lives was finally closing. How are you doing? I asked Kevin as we sat on a bench outside the courthouse. Honestly, I feel like I've been living in someone else's life for 3 years. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said. Just a very expensive education in human nature. Kevin had filed for divorce the week after Carla's arrest. The proceedings were complicated by the fact that she was in jail, but his lawyer expected everything to be finalized within a few months. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you stay so calm through all of this? If someone had been systematically trying to destroy my life, I think I would have lost my mind. I thought about it for a moment. The truth was, there had been moments when I questioned my own sanity, when I wondered if maybe Carla was right and I was losing my grip on reality. I think it helped that I had a purpose beyond just defending myself. Once I realized what she was doing, I became determined to protect you and the children from her manipulation. That gave me something to fight for instead of just something to fight against. Still, the planning you did, the way you gathered evidence and built your case, where did that come from? I smiled. Sweetheart, I didn't survive 30 years as a high school principal without learning how to deal with manipulative people. Carla was more sophisticated than most teenagers, but the fundamental tactics were the same. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching lawyers and clients hurry up and down the courthouse steps. What happens now? Kevin asked. Now we go home. You and the children move back into your house. I go back to my quiet retirement, and we all try to figure out what normal looks like. Will you be okay living alone? He asked. I looked at my son, this good man who had been so thoroughly deceived by someone he'd trusted completely, and felt a surge of pride in how he'd handled everything once he'd learned the truth. Kevin, I've been taking care of myself for a long time. But more importantly, I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Carla spent months trying to convince everyone that I was weak and confused, unable to manage my own life. Turns out she was wrong about everything. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea and reading through the stack of letters I'd received since the news story aired. Most were supportive, but several were from people sharing their own experiences with family financial abuse. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from a woman in the next county, whose adult son had been gradually gaining control over her finances by convincing her she needed help managing her affairs. She'd seen my interview and realized she was being manipulated. I picked up my phone and called her. Mrs. Patterson, this is Margaret Collins. I received your letter today. Oh my goodness. Mrs. Collins, I can't believe you called me. I wanted you to know that you're not alone and that recognizing what's happening is the first step towards stopping it. We talked for over an hour. By the end of the conversation, Mrs. Patterson had agreed to contact Adult Protective Services and asked me to recommend a lawyer. After I hung up, I realized that this was what I wanted to do with whatever time I had left. Not just survive Carla's attack on my life, but use what I'd learned to help others facing similar situations. I opened my laptop and began typing. My name is Margaret Collins, and 3 months ago, My daughter-in-law tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my life savings. This is what I learned about fighting back 2 hours later. I had the beginning of what would eventually become a comprehensive guide to recognizing and responding to elder financial abuse. My phone rang. Kevin's number. Mom, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? I asked. For being strong enough to fight back. For protecting our family. For showing me what real courage looks like. Kevin, you don't need to thank me for protecting my own family. Yes, I do, he insisted. Another person might have just accepted what was happening. Might have let Carla win, but you didn't give up. Even when things looked hopeless, after we hung up, I walked through my house, appreciating the silence and peace I had almost lost. Tomorrow, Emma and Tyler would come over after school for their regular Wednesday visit. This weekend, Kevin and I were planning to take them to the zoo. Normal things. Family things. The kind of life Carla had tried to steal from all of us. I settled into my favorite chair with my tea and looked out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully this year. At 52, I was starting a new chapter of my life, not as the victim of someone else's greed and manipulation, but as someone who had learned exactly how strong she could be when the people she loved were threatened. Carla had been right about one thing: I was tougher than anyone gave me credit for. I just wished she'd realized that before she tried to destroy my family. The truth had indeed set us free, all of us. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.